welcome to Beyond at Home. I'm Molly and this is Lockie, and we're so glad that you're here, whether you're watching live on Facebook or YouTube or whether you're watching later on demand.
This episode of Beyond at Home is going to be a little bit different, but by the end we hope that you're going to have some really practical ways that you can move past some of the disruptions that life throws your way.
Here at Beyond, we want to create a church that unchurched people love to engage with. So if you stick around till the end of the video, we're going to show you a really tangible next step that you can take.
But in the meantime, if you're not subscribed or like this page, go ahead and do that so you don't miss anything that Beyond has got to throw your way. We'll see you at the end.
See ya.
In this episode of Beyond at Home, we're going to be mixing things up a little bit. For the last couple of episodes, we've been looking at how you can bounce back from the disruptions that life throws your way. And if you haven't checked out parts 1 and 2, I'd suggest you do that before you watch any further. But in this episode specifically, I'm going to sit down and have a conversation with someone who has bounced back from a disruption in their life. And we're going to be able to learn some of the ways that we can bounce back from the disruptions in our life. And hopefully by the end of it, you might just discover how your struggle can become your superpower. So Kate, you experienced some disruptions in your childhood and growing up that centered around one person in particular. But do you want to share a little bit, before we get to like how you dealt with that disruption, do you want to share a little bit with us about what that disruption was? Because it wasn't the sort of disruption that if anyone was walking down the street, they'd look at your life or look at you and be like, oh, Kate's trying to bounce back from something.
Yeah. I guess the catch-all phrase would be emotional abuse.
Yeah.
Which a lot of people can relate to, and like you say, it's not necessarily a visible thing.
Yeah.
Particularly when it's in your home.
Okay.
And there aren't other people there to see it, question it, raise it.
Yeah.
Whatever. So for me, it was my dad.
Yep.
So it was an everyday thing for every day of my life. And he was emotionally abusive to me and to my mum and to his mum, my grandma, who I was really close with. And that was my whole worldview, so what did that look like? It looked like, as well as all the, verbal abuse, which is often a part of emotional abuse, and, degrading and controlling and
pulling down self-worth.
And trying to do that. Yeah. And I think if I didn't have a pretty strong foundation from my grandma in my self-worth, I might still be in it.
Yeah. And how is that challenging for you? Because we're in a culture at the moment where we talk about mental health really, really readily. Like it's a big thing.
Right.
And it's awesome. And right at the moment, if people are watching this video later, like we're in the middle of COVID still at the moment, and we're talking about the effects that mental health is having on isolation and all that. But this was happening for you in the mid to early 90s where mental health wasn't talked about as much. So how was that for you going through that?
It was hard, really hard and all-consuming. Yeah. So I knew that my dad's behaviours were wrong.
Yep.
Even as a kid, I remember at 12 having screaming matches with my father, defending my mum.
Yeah.
And that's not.
That's a 12-year-old shouldn't be doing that. Yeah.
But my mum wasn't defending herself because she was a victim of his abuse. Yeah. Had been for a long, long time. And because I knew it was wrong, I fought against it. Yeah. And I fought against it every single day. Yeah. But at the same time, it was my whole worldview. Mm-hmm. You can't help but have your upbringing form your worldview. You don't know any different. Yeah. Like an example of that was even once I had an opportunity to get out of that, I was still so kind of brainwashed that I was going to go back into it. So let me explain what I'm talking about. So finished high school, didn't want to do uni, worked with my father in the family business for a couple of years, then found an interest in becoming a financial planner. Okay. So went and started doing my finance degree, And I remember one day talking to Dan and his mum about what I was going to do.
And Dan's your husband, just for everyone watching. Yeah.
That's my husband. Top bloke. Don't cut that out, Pat. Talking to them about what I was going to do when I finished my degree.
Yeah.
And saying to them how, I'll finish my finance degree and then I'll go back and work with Dad in the family business.
Yeah.
And help out with that skill set then under my belt. And I remember the look of shock on both of their faces, like, you've got this ticket out.
Yeah, why?
How could you possibly consider going back into that?
Yeah.
But I can't explain why. I mean, that seems illogical.
Yeah.
And I guess it was, but it had formed, even though I knew it was wrong, all of his actions and his behaviours and whatever, I was so invested, I guess, in the business and trying to make it succeed that, I was going to do that. So, and what it looked like for me was I was angry all the time with my dad, and not just anger, but rage.
Yeah, okay. So something that you would carry with you from the moment you woke up, all throughout the day. There would be this burning.
And I was always trying to preempt, if he accuses me of X, how will I defend myself against that? And what if he says this crazy thing? How will I respond to that?
So always on guard, always ready to battle. Yeah.
And he totally unpredictable and really hurtful stuff. You know, like some memorable occasions were, you know, comments he'd make, like I would do something specifically, go out of my way to do something that would be helpful for him that day that he needed. And instead of potentially being thanked for that, instead what I would get is, are you some kind of effing idiot or what?
Yeah, yeah.
And delivered in a really nasty tone too, of course. And so, the rage was there all the time. And there's such a difference I found between anger and rage. Like it would eat me.
Yeah.
You know? And what that meant then was I was really not very nice to be around and didn't even realise it.
And it almost seems like hearing that there's kind of this like, there's this part of you that knows like, hey, this is wrong. But it's almost like you're not sure what a picture of the world would be like to not have this. It's like, I know this is not right. I know this shouldn't be what's happening, but I've never seen it, and I don't know what it would be like to have home as this safe space. And so, you know, as you're sharing, like talking about the rage that you carry, and you're kind of carrying this almost like this one big disruption with you.
Constant stress.
So how did that affect then, and you kind of touched on it, the fact that you were kind of angry and it kind of pulled out, but how did that, I don't know, are there any specific instances, or how did that disruption then affect the way that you lived or interacted with the rest of your relationships and the rest of life?
It hugely did, and way more than I even realised. Like, in my head, if I was spewing about Dad did this and blah, 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 and blah, 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 and going off my tree, which I frequently did to anyone around me, in my head, they knew I wasn't angry with them. And I wasn't. But what I didn't realise was that it's still really unpleasant to be around. And Dan, bless him, was brave enough to point that out to me in the midst of one of these sessions one day. And I could even take you to the spot where we were. Like, I remember it that clearly. And I remember him saying, it's not very pleasant to be around you when you're, being this angry and whatever.
What was that insight for you like? Was that kind of the first time that you sort of was like, oh, wow, like I'd never thought of that?
Absolutely. Like I just went, oh, wow, yeah.
And
I guess because the image I had portrayed to be by my dad was, he was entirely self-focused. The whole home revolved around him. Every single decision, big or small, was always what he wanted. Mum had no say, I had no say, and that was it in the household. And so if only the person who yells the loudest gets heard, And my mum showed the opposite.
Yeah.
I mean, she'd been pretty much squashed.
Yeah.
So I didn't see her standing up for her own well-being either, or mine.
Yep.
Then you don't know any other way. And so I thought I was just venting.
Yep. Okay.
And turns out it was really horrible for everyone to be around. So when Dan said that to me, from then on, I started looking at, how could I not have seen what I've been the recipient of?
Yeah. Kind of flowing out into into other relationships and creating a disconnect.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Even though that wasn't the intention, that was the result. And there's this phrase that I don't know who coined it, but it's almost like that phrase that hurt people.
Exactly.
And it's almost like, hey, I'm not intending to do this, but because of the hurt that you'd experienced at home, it was flowing out into other relationships. Yeah. And so obviously Dan pointed that out, and I think it's maybe helpful for people. Like, so you didn't grow up a Jesus follower.
Huh.
You didn't grow up in a family of Jesus followers.
No way.
And so then you met Dan, and Dan is a Jesus follower.
Yeah.
And what was that process like for you, or what began to change when you began to follow Jesus, that you had to address that disruption, you had to address some of the hurt? What was it, one of the most significant things that happened in that process?
I'd heard about faith and God and stuff, and I didn't want to borrow it unless it was the real deal.
Yeah.
Like I was, no thanks. And Dan's family knew God personally, and that was a whole different perspective for me. And to see people treat each other nicely,
it's just
was lovely, but vastly different.
Okay.
And to have people be considerate of one another and courteous. And I remember this all came to a head with my dad and my mum. And at the point where I was asking questions about God and faith and whatever, I'd done my research and I'd done Alpha and I was looking into it, but I'm like, still I'm undecided if God's even real.
Yep.
And I did the whole, God, if you're real type thing. And where that came into it was, I remember learning that my stuff is forgiven by God.
Okay.
Which, wow, thanks, amazing.
And this is probably, am I guessing this is around the time where you're kind of like, oh wow, I didn't realize the impact and the hurt that I was maybe causing other people in my life. So you're probably thinking like, oh wow, like God's forgiven me of not just my stuff, but also the stuff that's flowed out of me into other relationships.
Yeah.
Okay, sweet.
And that brought me to my knees in tears and gratitude to God for forgiving me. Mm-hmm. But I remember also then realizing, this is hard to swallow, but as much as God has forgiven me, he's also forgiven my dad.
Yeah.
That was really hard to swallow.
Yeah.
And then to learn that I had to as well.
Yeah.
I'm like, come on. But I'm like, okay, what was actually, again, hard to learn but quite freeing was that I have no right to judge.
Yeah. Yeah.
Only God has that right.
Yeah.
But it was freeing insofar as he is going to judge. Hey, I don't need to.
So how hard was it for you to forgive? And then what happened? Is it like, did anything change? Was the rage still there? Like, yeah.
There was no human way I was ever going to forgive the person I hated, vehemently hated, and had done for 20 years.
Yeah.
For what he'd done to me, my mum, my grandma.
Yeah.
And so I remember saying to God, hey, if you're real, you're going to have to help me forgive this person.
Yeah.
And so I know the fact that I was able to must mean God is real.
Yeah.
Because it was not natural. I mean, this is some supernatural stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And so because I was able to start forgiving God, it must mean that God is real because I couldn't do it by myself.
Yep.
And so that was the personal proof for me.
Yeah.
And that's, I guess, that was the setting point. Yeah, okay, I'm going to follow this guy. God is real. Forgiveness is real. And it's so freeing. And
in that moment, like obviously even thinking about it is still quite emotional and challenging. And so in that moment, I think people perhaps have a misunderstanding of what forgiveness is.
Yeah.
Like I just forget and that person gets off the hook. But I think one of the things about Jesus is that and forgiveness is that it actually is more about us and what we get back.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I've heard someone say is that forgiveness actually gives us back our future.
Yeah.
And so for you, what kind of changed in your future? Because it's been however many years since you've forgiven, 20 years since you've forgiven your dad. So you've almost been living life as long as having forgiven your dad as you have lived life full of rage.
Yeah.
What's changed in the last 20 years, because of that,
yeah. So like what you said, I learned a lot about in that process what forgiveness is, but more importantly, what it's not.
Mm-hmm.
It is not letting someone off the hook. It's putting them on God's hook.
Yeah.
Where they were meant to be in the first place, not mine.
Yeah.
It's not forgetting. You can't just pretend all that stuff didn't happen. Whatever your stuff is, you can't just pretend it wasn't real. And denying it is not healthy.
Yeah.
It's not allowing yourself to be put in a position where they can repeat the behaviours.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need to do that.
Yeah.
You don't even need to tell the person you're forgiving that you've ever forgiven them.
Yeah.
It's all for the forgiver primarily. Yeah. So visually how I've always pictured it is it's like all of the wrong actions were a barb in my chest.
Yep.
Like a fish hook.
Yep.
With the little
I like that analogy.
Stuck.
Yep.
And then every time Dad would, again, pull on that fishing line with those same actions, which would bring up all the past instances and hurt and the, am I insane because he's denied all of this stuff? And I know it was there. I lived it. But when I call him on it, he would say it didn't happen.
Yeah.
To the point of offering that we will go to hypnotherapy to bring out. And I'm like, wow. So, denial was his way of justifying that he'd never made those actions.
Okay, yep.
And so, whenever he would pull on those again, instead of those barbs still being in there, the process of me forgiving meant I'd pulled those barbs out.
Yeah.
So the old wounds were still there and they would gradually heal, but he couldn't make them worse and again.
Yep.
And also, the other thing I learned about forgiveness is it's a process.
Yeah.
And I needed to forgive him again and again and again and again and again. And it didn't mean that all those previous times weren't legit.
Yes. Yep.
And it's not a magic you forgive and you forget everything. I hate that phrase.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a load of crap. You don't forget.
Yep.
But in time, once the hooks are out because you've forgiven, the pain lessens.
Yeah.
Which is natural. Thing.
I think there's perhaps this misconception that, Christians, they just kind of have it all together, or they play and they pretend nice. And Paul...
Not the real ones.
It's true. And Paul writes this letter, right? He writes this letter to the church in Corinth, which was a church that was just really messed up. Like, people were going to the temple.
Very human.
Yeah, very human. People were going to the temple with prostitutes. Like, people were getting wasted when they were getting together at church. Like, this was a crazy kind of place. And Paul talks about the idea when he writes this letter to them that, hey, when God comforts us and when God takes us on that healing process and we're able to forgive, it's not just about ourselves. It's about other people as well. And the reason that God allows us and we can heal through our struggles is so that we can help others.
Absolutely.
And so I'm wondering, as we sort of start to wrap this conversation up, is I love it that we can talk about how you've personally overcome that disruption. But how has God used that disruption for you to help other people in the midst of the disruption that they're experiencing in their life?
Yeah. There've been a lot of instances where I could relate to people who'd gone through that type of emotional abuse, the gaslighting, whatever you want to call it, where people who haven't lived that can't relate and help them and support them, even if they care. There have been a lot of instances of that. And I can walk alongside those people and go, yes, this is real. I actually get it. I get how it messes with your head. You're not nuts. Don't allow them to make you think that you are, because they deny the stuff you actually were there for. And you can get through, Jesus follower or not. You know, I have these conversations with both. Hang on, there is a way out. And, you know, depending on the person and the situation, I might then share the whole forgiveness aspect for their benefit. Take those hooks out. You know? But then there's also been some really noticeable, memorable, one-off big instances where I guess the superpower from God of learning to forgive because of that struggle with Dad has helped me help other people to use that same superpower of forgiveness.
So this is an instance that like wasn't a one-off conversation, it was you were actually journeying with them over a longer period of time.
So I'll try and explain. I was in a workplace for about 11 years, and it was a really stressful workplace, both because of the nature of the work and also because of some very, very strong individuals who weren't that dissimilar to my dad.
Okay.
And a lot of people probably would have resigned, but because I'd gotten through my dad's behaviours that were like that, I could endure it. That was sort of an added bonus, I guess. But what it then meant was my manager at the time and I, after about, I don't know, 9 years or something, a new person joined our team, and we didn't know anything wrong at the beginning, but it gradually unfolded that they had very improper intentions, I guess. We later found out that what their aim was to bring all these false accusations against myself and my manager so that we would both get fired and that she could have the manager's role. That was, she actually admitted that to someone who later told us that, but we didn't know this at the time. So all underhanded, all behind our backs. She developed and manipulated scenarios and lied to people and turned people against us. And it became a huge thing where then she brought false claims of bullying against us. In reality, she was doing exactly that, but, you know. And so it became a massive, massive issue in that workplace. Now, humanly, the response to that when we found out what was going on and to the damage that person did to our mental health, both my health and my manager's mental health, the natural human response would have been to hate that person, to want bad things to happen to that person, to think horribly about that person, you know, normal human responses to being hurt. But because I'd had that experience with my dad, and because I'd learned the benefits of forgiving and how and what it's not, I was then able to show my manager that different reaction. And she was really intrigued by that. She used to say to me, how can you possibly not hate this person? And, you know, how is it that you don't want to run over her with your car like I do?
Why are you not having the natural reaction that everyone else in your position would have and really should have? I'm guessing is sort of her response. Okay.
And I shared it with her. So I said, look, if I don't forgive her, it's to my detriment.
Yeah.
I need to pull those fish hooks out. I need to pull out those barbs. And then when she repeats the behaviours that hurt, they're not pulling on the same wound again, you know?
Yeah.
And she was really shocked by that.
Yeah.
Now, my manager was a, let's say, very strong personality.
Sure.
And we have a very good relationship now. But at the time, I think she probably only listened to what I had to say, interestingly, because she'd had a family member in her upbringing.
Okay.
And her experience with one of her family members was very similar to what I'd had with my dad.
Okay, so like that shared experience
Exactly.
was what gave you the trust in the first place.
She trusted me.
Yeah.
And that's exactly the word for it. She was not someone who would trust anybody. She used to say that.
Yep.
Yeah. She only trusted me, and my words probably only carried any weight because we had that shared experience. And so that was God using all the stuff I'd been through to help this person come to trust me because of that shared experience, so that then they saw the value in my non-natural responses to the behaviours of this person. And then my manager actually came to faith, which is enormous as a result of all of this mess. And she was then able to forgive this person or start the process, because it's a process, right?
Yeah.
And to this day, she is, every time we talk, she's like, I'm so grateful that you showed me that other way, and that, you know, it's made such a difference in my life. And not just with that individual, but
that's just
10
one
years plus.
That's just one example of
That's
how
one major example.
your struggle and your disruption really in a way became a superpower that then you had the opportunity to speak into other people who had shared a similar struggle and help them experience the freedom, and that the forgiveness opens up a future for you.
Yeah. And like it says, you know, and I think it's Corinthians, one of the books in the Bible, it says, you know, God comforts us so that we can comfort others.
Yeah.
And for me, it's been in that exact same way.
Yeah.
You know, he has not wasted that very horrible experience I had. He's made good use of it in ways I could never imagine.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and that's probably the best you can say.
Yeah.
For such a situation is that, well, it brought me to my faith, and I may have come there eventually otherwise, but I had no easing in period into my coming to faith.
Yeah.
It was all wham, straight in the middle of all of this, really hitting the fan.
Yeah.
But, you know, it was proven to me that it's real, and maybe for me it was going to take such a powerful situation for it to become real.
Yeah.
So it's helped me in that, but it's helped me with that, I suppose you'd call it superpower from God, to be able to forgive and help others see the benefit of forgiveness, and to relate to people who have had emotional abuse or who have had similar situations.
Well, Kate, I wanted to thank you so much for sharing your story, for the vulnerable way in which you did that. And I know I got a whole lot out of it. There's a whole lot of things that I'm going to be thinking about in terms of fighting for it and bouncing back and being more resilient. And I really hope that everyone watching was able to get something or grab onto one thing. But if you could give one final piece of advice or one final thought that was like a sentence or something, what would it be in light of your story, in light of everything that you've lived? What would be the one sort of piece that you'd leave with us?
I probably would say, don't let your struggle be wasted.
Okay.
you know, if you can get through it, if you can bounce back, be resilient, and that takes a fight.
Yep.
See and imagine the benefit, not just to you, but to every life you ever touch. And the help that you can be to others, and the help that you can help God be to others.
I love that. Well, thanks for taking the time, and I hope the coffee was all right.
Yeah, great. A bit watery.
Thanks for sticking around to the end of the video, guys. If somebody's name popped to mind while you were watching the video today and you thought you'd like to share the message with them, we'd love to encourage you to do so, whether that's on Facebook or on YouTube.
Yeah, and if you'd like a next step, we're going to point you towards the Beyond the Message podcast. And this week, Chris and I sit down for a conversation. We unpack this message. It goes for about half an hour, so it's great to listen to while you're driving to work, doing the washing, whatever you're doing. We'd love to encourage you to check out the Beyond the Message podcast.
Yeah, have a great week, guys, and we'll see you next week when we're exploring some things we wish we'd learnt growing up.
See you later.
See ya.